So, hey everyone, thank you so much for coming today. So, who am I? I'm Megan, and I'm the founder of Content for Good and Co. I'm so glad that you can join us today. For those who don't know us yet, Content for Good and Co., we kind of have branded ourselves as the home of the marketing as a force for good movement. So, in a sense, we are a media hub and a community for marketers and creatives to come together to learn how to use their skills to make the world a better place, and not just louder, dirtier, and full of pollution. And how we do that as an organization is we create content, workshops, programs like what you're part of today to help upskill marketers on sustainability and build spaces just like this one. But today we're going to be talking about AI marketing and how we can use it for good. And we have a great guest to help us on this topic. So first, thank you so much for showing up. As a small NGO, this means a lot to me to see so many wonderful people in the audience. And I'm very thankful that you're sharing your time with us today. So thank you so much. And what is this event going to be about? This event, we're going to be talking about using AI in our marketing work, of course, but how can we do that with intention and how we can do it with a for good mindset. We'll talk about questions like how can I be more privacy compliant? How can I avoid bias? And we have a great group of people who are joining us that are experts in their own right who will help be leading the conversation and facilitating conversation on these topics. Now, we know all these questions don't have easy answers. So tonight, we're not going to pretend that there are answers to this and that there's a conclusion and a done goal for this. So this is not an intervention. It's not going to be negative. We're not going to tell you what to do or that it's bad that you're doing this or that. This is a conversation, an open community and environment for us to learn together. So I hope that helps set the stage for what we can do today. And let's go over quickly some ground rules since we are a community organization. So just really quick, if you feel comfortable, I got another person. If you feel comfortable, please turn on your camera. I know this isn't for everybody, but it does help bring in the community feel. So please turn on your camera if you feel comfortable. Listen more than you talk. This is a tough conversation. It's a tough topic. It is harming people in different ways. People are approaching it from different angles. So just be thoughtful. Don't be so quick, maybe sometimes in your responses. Listen more than you maybe talk and give other people a space. And on that same message, be kind. Because like I said, AI is changing our industry. It's scary, it's challenging, it's energy draining, it's isolating. So just be conscious that the people here in this room are good people and they might be affected about this in different ways that you haven't thought about that. So consider their personal and their financial well-being and how it relates to AI and how it's changing their way of work. So I hope you can internalize those a little bit. So let's move on and let's talk really quick about the roadmap and then we'll get to our guest of honor. So first we're going to be talking, we have 75 minutes together. First we're going to be talking with Madalena, who's going to talk to us about sustainability and intentional AI. She's a sustainability and AI strategist. And I'm going to leave it there because I know she can introduce herself way better than I can. After that, we're going to go into small breakout groups. So please stay around for that. We have a panel of really great experts who are volunteering their time today to talk to you about these topics in small, intimate conversations to kind of help us come together and start the conversation. Then after that, we're going to come back together. And then we're going to share with the greater group. Specifically, the conversational stewards will be sharing what was talked about in those, and we'll open it up also to the greater group to continue sharing. So in the interest of time, I'm going to skip really quickly through this, but again, this is who we are. Please follow our work and I'll share some links after, but we have a lot of great programming coming up at the end of the year and into the summer. So it'd be wonderful to see you there if you can come. So without further ado, we have our guest of honor coming onto our floor. Please welcome Madalena to the virtual floor. She's going to be talking to us about intentional AI marketing.
Thanks, Megan. Thank you for having me. Yeah, perfect. All right. I'll jump right into it. Also, just because I want to be as clear as possible, I think we have around half an hour together today. And then we have a few minutes at the end for questions, if I remember correctly. I'm just fussing about a little bit with my screens. There we go. All right. So I thought I'll give you a little bit of just a breakdown of who I am and why I'm here. Me and Megan had a really serendipitous get together last month in Berlin. So for those of you based in Berlin, I also got to experience a bit of your city. I'm based in Amsterdam. And as we got to know each other and she told me about the good work that she's doing, I also thought, you know what, this is also something that we're also figuring out as we go. And it's very rare that we have these spaces. And of course, I'm talking about AI. It's very rare that we have these spaces to go in and actually say that out loud, like, hey, I actually know what I'm doing to some extent, but a lot of us are still figuring things out. And that's okay. And that's the point of gatherings like this. So thank you, Megan, for extending the invitation. What I'm going to do in the next 20 minutes or so is really, I'm not going to tell you what AI should look like in your work. I'm going to offer a 3-layer perspective of intentionality that hopefully you can then take and apply. And then I look forward to the conversations that we're going to have at the end. So for a bit of context, because we know context is everything these days, so that you know where I'm coming from and why this matters to the conversation of intentionality in AI and in marketing. My work normally sits at the intersection of sustainability and AI. So I don't look at AI as a productivity hack, but I look at it as a big evolution that has ESG consequences, so environmental, social, and governance consequences. I come from the EV space where I worked with EVBox and the travel space where I worked with locals. And then before that, I worked in global mobility. But initially, at the very beginning of my career, I actually started in communications and marketing. So in a way, it feels like a really nice full circle to be here. I'm also writing a book at the moment, and part of the process that I'm going to share tonight is also coming from that writing process that I'm currently in, and the questions that I kind of kept coming back to. What does it mean to use AI with integrity, and what does it actually cost me personally, and maybe by extension you, when we don't use it with intentionality? So in terms of where AI actually helps, and what are some of the things that we can name clearly from the beginning, I do want to clarify that it does help a lot of us. I think there's no point in taking that off the table. I use it, you use it. And of course, we are here because we're not anti-AI, but maybe we are here because we care about doing it well. So the efficiency gains, from my perspective, are quite real. The first drafts, the formatting or the reformatting, the summarizing of boring 2-hour meetings that can then become 3 action points. For me, and maybe for you as well, those are real hours that I get back in my week. And that I can then use to some extent to show up more as a human. And we'll talk a little bit about the cognitive load of always being on with AI as well. And then, of course, when it comes to personalization, I'm sure you have experienced that to some extent, that it's genuinely powerful with AI nowadays. You're able to tailor messaging without having to multiply headcount. Those of you working for small businesses, I'm sure that has come as a godsend. And the ability, the data synthesis, the ability to spot patterns across large data sets has really increased the output that I can put out there. Like I mentioned, I come from the sustainability world, so I've spent quite a few years in carbon footprint calculations. The work that I can do now with AI, though not as clear and always correct, is much faster than the analysts that I worked with in the past. So, of course, my intention here is not to take this away in any way, but to ask, what is it that we do when the parts of using AI become a little bit harder to talk about? And here is where we jump in my part of work, which is the true cost of AI. And I'm going to briefly walk you through what I think gets skipped over quite often, because in an AI or die world, it's very much about faster, more, more output, more ability, building more capability altogether. But there are three dimensions that I would like us to hold together. The first one is the environmental one. I'll show you some numbers in a little bit as well. But here we're looking at infrastructure of data centers. We're looking at disruptions that are happening overall in the AI environmental scene. But we're also looking at how the system that big AI is currently using is very similar to the systems of big oil, very extractive, very resource heavy. Then when it comes to the social aspect of it, there's quite a few elements here, one of them being the labor practices that are behind these labels, these models. So we're talking about what happens with the data workers that are taking care of our data and that are basically actively training the harmful content that we don't get to see. We're talking about the bias that gets backed in the training data that really reflects the world, not as maybe it should be, but maybe as it is at the moment. And then when we jump towards the governance dimension, as somebody who comes from corporate sustainability, risk is something that comes to mind very often, right? So we're talking about reputational and institutional risks that come out when we publish AI output without adequate oversight. And I'm sure some of you have seen the big report, the governmental report that Accenture put out there, the 400,000 euro one, and they ended up doing it with Gen AI. And then they forgot to delete some of the prompts out of it. And it was a huge scandal. And then they had to pay all of that money back, plus a huge fine for not disclosing. And that was the governance element from the ESG framework when we look at the true cost of AI. So as we were looking and I was preparing for the webinar today, I loved seeing your questions, by the way. So thank you to those of you that submitted questions. And some of the questions referred to what is the environmental reality, right? Like, what do we know? And I want to be very honest and tell you that we do know relatively little because big tech and big AI are not disclosing the environmental data. So at this moment, as much as I would love to tell you the exact energy consumption that it took to train Claude, that information is not accessible. What we do know, we have estimates. So we know that one number that comes up very often is that one query, one prompt, uses around 0.34 watt hours of energy, which is, it's a blip in whatever ocean of perspective you want to look at. However, collectively, we're looking at, and this data is valid until the beginning of 2026, we're looking at approximately 310 gigawatt hours annually. Again, it's a number. What does that actually mean? What does it add up to? That is the equivalent of the annual electricity consumption of around 3 million people in the global south. If you look at it from a different perspective, approximately we have 2.5 billion daily queries, and the usage of all of those queries at this moment is equal to the electricity demand of 1.5 million US households. So one thing that I come over and over again is this phrase that I also put on the slide. Using a massive LLM, using Claude to do a search that I could do on Google is really like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. So then we're going to go a little bit into what does that mean and how does that actually use our own choices further on. But it is important here to keep in mind that the tool choice matters. The prompt choice matters. The habit of reaching for the biggest model available for every single task is something worth questioning. And I am going to be the first one to raise my hand here that I had to take out from my own habits the habit of running to my LLM of choice and asking it, how's the weather today? Because it felt easy. It was in my hand, it was just there. It felt comfortable. But that's not necessary, especially when we now have this huge small model revolution happening with a mix of models that are basically more specialized. Therefore, their energy consumption is also lower. I personally work with a mix of GreenPT, Taura, which are small models, and Claude with the intention of dropping Gemini in the near future. Now, if we start looking at the social reality, this is where it gets a little bit tricky because although imperfect, the environmental cost is measurable, right? We can make estimates. We can put it in a calculator. I can have an understanding, and I'll actually give you the estimate for building my presentation with Claude towards the end of the presentation, so you can see exactly. I know how much energy I burned for this particular task. But when it comes to social reality, it's often less visible. So it makes it, I think, easier to ignore. It's important to keep in mind that basically behind every AI product that we start using, there is hidden labor. Real people, often in global south, often in crisis affected areas, and often underpaid, that are employed as unqualified data labelers. So they're data workers, basically, so that the model keeps on learning from its own mistakes. The same applies with communities. There's communities affected by AI development where overall resources are quite scarce. It could be water, it could be pollution that comes from data centers, but it also, we see an increasing issue with restricted access to resources that were meant for people, but are now being used for development of data centers, for example. Oh, that went very fast. There we go. The other two elements that I wanted to mention on the social side is basically the bias issue, which is not abstract. If the training data reflects historical inequalities, and we know it does, because most of the LLMs are trained on vast numbers of data points, a lot of them low quality data points. When that happens, we know that the model reproduces those inequalities at scale. So every time that we use that output with that bias incorporated, we become part of that chain as well. And the data security piece that I want to personally name, because it's also very close to my own values and the aspects that I care about, there's no way around it really. So when it comes to personal information, client information, sensitive internal data, the reality is that none of that belongs in a consumer grade AI tool, which is fancy talk to say anything that is not enterprise level carries the risk of your content, your data being used for training models. There are enterprise alternatives, of course, and there are ways where you can go and basically turn off the training access so that your data is not used for training. So that's also worth exploring. When it comes to the governance, and I'm racing a little bit through this because I really want to get to the intentionality part, but I couldn't get there if I don't walk you through the ESG part first. So when it comes to the governance reality, I mentioned a bit briefly in the beginning that is really about risk, and that it's really about looking at what is it that we publish without verifying. What is it that we put out there, and what are the consequences that could come from that output being published? There's a phrase that I hear a lot, and I'm sure that I'm guilty of using it as well, which is let AI do the heavy lifting. And I understand the appeal. I would also like AI to do my laundry so I can do creative things and I can focus on what brings me joy in life. But I do think that there's something worth being precise when we say that sentence or we go around that meaning of the wording, because there is a difference between AI doing the drafting, the execution, and AI doing the deciding. And this is where I would like to leave you on the governance side of things. When we publish unverified AI output, we're not just cutting a corner, where it's a governance decision really. When I'm in a rush and I have client work and I do not plan that accordingly, if I choose to use AI in that client work, that is me taking a governance risk, which I will never take. But that is one way of looking at it. So we're basically saying, I trust this output enough to put it in the world without basically checking it. And that carries consequences, especially in marketing. I don't have to tell you about the consequences, in your own work, of course, but it carries legal, ethical, reputational weight that is important to be aware of. When it comes to what sits at the center of our environment at the moment, I would say that critical thinking is something that is not a soft skill and is really becoming the keystone of our environments, because everybody can generate content in a relatively fluent way in seconds. So, this ability of asking ourselves and basically answering, is this actually good? Is this actually true? Is this actually right within the context that I have? That is an asset that we have to protect. So, this brings me into we have an asset that we want to protect, but what is the external pressure that we're facing at the moment? For example, what are consumers saying? And I picked a small study that has just been released as well. It's one of the newest ones. It came out in February this year because I thought that the difference here is quite interesting to observe. So this comes from the AI Consumer Insights from 2026. And it looks like the following. The audiences are already asking this question, that they're asking, how are you keeping your assets secure? So what we know is that 32% of consumers are now using AI daily within this context of the survey. We're seeing that the people that we're actually marketing to are already inside the tools themselves, right? However, 81% of them are saying, I worry about my personal data. I worry about my personal conversations. And that's, they say that the trust is lower because of that. And when we look at the trust aspect itself, that's 16% of people say they trust AI a great deal. So what I find super interesting here, and I wanted to share with you, is that it seems like we're operating in a moment where AI adoption is accelerating. However, trust is lagging behind, right? So we have this gap between 81% and 16%. So the gap, from my perspective here, is that it's not something that we should actually be waiting on to fill up, but it is a space where we get to choose how to operate. It becomes a space where maybe intentionality in the way that we do marketing can become a differentiator until we see how the rest of the markets react and how consumers react to our marketing choices. So stepping into the gray zones, because this is what we promised you and this is what we wanted to kind of get into with you today. I want to name, and we're going to have some time to also go through a variation of these questions in the group chat afterwards. But I want to name 4 questions that I think most of us encounter, but maybe we don't have the time and the space to always discuss them. And I'll give you very short answers to each one of them as I went through the exercise myself. Whose content trained this model and who benefits from that? So when I went down the rabbit hole of answering this question for myself, I came across the small model revolution. And I realized that for my work, I get equally good and sometimes even better results from a small model that has been trained on data points that are relevant to my work. When should we disclose that AI was involved in what we made? Right? Do we disclose it in our writing? Do we disclose it in our LinkedIn posts? Do we disclose it in our blog posts for another example? And we see it, and maybe you've seen it as well. I've started seeing examples, labels on websites, on digital products saying human first, AI supported, but human first. Another question, a gray zone for myself as well, is what happens to the people whose roles these tools are displacing? And the way that I navigate this is mostly through conversations that I have with my own clients and sustainable AI and the strategy, where their own team members are worrying about training their AI displacement, right? So leadership comes in, they say, hey, it's time for you to really amp up your AI usage. And I go into workshops with employees and they say, actually, I don't want to. Actually, I'm afraid that this means that my job is going to be cut off. So then we take that input and we bring it back to the leadership teams. And then one of the fourth gray zone, how do we spot and interrupt bias when it comes to showing up in our outputs? And the way that I navigate that, and I invite you to navigate as well, is that I'm adding instructions to my GPT, to my projects, to my artifacts to basically double check for the bias, right? So my first ChatGPT account in the very beginning had a very long instruction paragraph where I was telling it how to make sure that it has a progressive perspective, that it looks at all of the ESG frameworks, and that it takes into account the environmental footprint of the topics that I'm bringing up. As Megan also mentioned in the beginning, the answers are not clean cut. I wish I could tell you, I have the answers. Here they are. This is my gift to you. But I think naming them and starting to navigate these gray zones is really to stop ourselves from making accidentally choices that then we realize these choices, they don't actually endorse the way that we would want to act if we had the space and the time to figure out what is in alignment with ourselves. So because this is quite a bit and we have a limited amount of time for today, I'm going to now jump towards the layers of intentionality, and we'll briefly cover the disclosure gray zone in the last part of the keynote, and then we'll see what happens afterwards. So in terms of the first layer of intentionality, it gets very very pragmatic as well. Everything we have talked about so far is really the why, right? Like, why do we need to be intentional about AI? What I want to spend the rest of our time on is really the how. So the first layer that I want to propose to you is the layer of these three directions, these three pieces, if you'd like. It's not really a framework. It's not really a policy. It's really three questions that you can ask for yourself within the context that you're building on how you use AI as you start making your marketing decisions in a more organized way, let's say. So the first one is, does this decision affect someone? It could be a person, it could be a community, it could be a reputation. And if the answer is yes, then maybe that's a signal to slow down and be a bit more deliberate. An example here, because it took me some time to wrap my head around it as well, is that you might be generating a personalized message that will shape how somebody perceives a health product, or maybe a financial decision, or maybe a vulnerable moment in their life. So then, if using AI in that way can affect somebody negatively, maybe there's a different approach to it. And I have an example in mind. A friend of mine was recently postpartum, and she was suffocated by the weight loss and kind of get, snap back to your body type of messages on Instagram, which really affected her negatively. And we then went through the loophole of kind of trying to understand how did that happen. And that was all basically AI-driven slop that found her. Then the second question, am I outsourcing judgment or execution? Right? I'm sure I don't have to explain this to you, of course, because you're there, but it's always worth just having a double check. Am I brainstorming with the AI, or am I asking the AI, what is the decision here? And if I'm asking it that, is it also a decision that I would be making regardless? Or am I in a rush and I really am relying on an AI to make a decision that is not in alignment with myself? And then the third question here, would I sign my name on this output? It's basically the AI equivalent of, if you're not going to say something to somebody's face, then don't say it behind their back, right? Jumping to the second layer of intentionality, I mentioned that we have three in total. There's three questions that you can think of it as basically your context building. You can think of it as your MD file that maybe you're setting up in Claude, or you can think of it as a Google Doc. So the first layer, we looked at three questions that have to do with the guardrails altogether. The second layer looks at questions that map what is actually AI assisted work for yourself. So what are we making? For whom and for why? What is the strategic intent here? What does this person need to feel or know? And this layer is your layer. AI doesn't have access to this unless you put it down. Of course, it can generalize, but it doesn't make for intentionality when we rely on that generalization. The other part, the second part here, is execution. Right? So this is where you can delegate as much as you feel comfortable delegating. This is the drafting, the iterations, and where AI can earn its place if that's something that you choose to do, because it handles volume, it handles material that then we can react and shape. And then the third part here is the decision making. It's the judgment on everything that happens after the output arrives. Is it good? Is it true? Is it right for this moment, for this audience? Does it sound like us? Does it belong to AI, or does it belong to me? And you can think of this as being the sandwich method, right? So the why and the what belongs to you. The making can belong to AI in whatever capacity you feel comfortable, and the judgment belongs to you as well. And the risk here is not that we use AI for execution. The risk is that we might, without realizing, without having the space for intention, we might let it bleed into direction and judgment, and we don't notice, and we end up delivering something that is maybe far away from what we would deliver otherwise. The third layer of intentionality goes into the disclosing part of it, the transparency that I mentioned, one of the gray zones that we briefly touched upon. And these are two conversations that I really like to mention and bring up, that I think we need to be honest about with ourselves and maybe then later in the group. The first is internal. Do we tell our employers, our colleagues, our collaborators, which parts of our work were AI assisted? Do we know for ourselves where the red line is, the work that we wouldn't outsource because it doesn't matter how efficient we would get at it, that work stays with us? And the second part is external. What does our audience have a right to know? That when do they have the right to know that AI was involved? Most of the times we don't see this disclosure. Most of the times and maybe you can think about your own LinkedIn experience, we kind of spot it on our feed and we either scroll away, or I personally get annoyed. But then what is the intentionality behind that, right? How do we choose to move forward? And there's no universal rule here, but what there is that there's this, oh, I did not think about it type of answer that I think we don't have the luxury to keep on having. So moving to the final checklist, and I'm going to wrap up because I know Megan has some cool stuff for us as well. This is an example of the energy consumption that I had for this particular presentation. I wanted to show you. This is a very cool plugin, which is called AI Watch with a double T. And this is how it measures it. And I also wanted to show you an example of how disclosing AI usage for a LinkedIn post, this is for my own profile, can look like if that's something that you choose to experiment with. So the final checklist, right? What is the brief? What are three things that you build your layers, and then you need to have a final check, right? You need to have a checklist to kind of make sure that you're there and that you're comfortable with it. So the first one would be, what does this specific person actually feel right now? Right? Like it's the emotional state of the human in the moment they will encounter the piece of content that you put out there. Are they overwhelmed? Are they hopeful? Are they skeptical? And that specificity, that's a hard word to say, is what carries into the prompt, because then you can use that for the best execution for your own use case. The second one is a guardrail. What must this never sound like? This is your brand guidelines, the thing that the model can never actually infer on its own. Your voice, your values, the things that you would never say, regardless of how fluent the output is. I'm always going to speak to you this way. Anything that sounds off from this particular presentation is not written by me. And the third one, what must AI not decide? Right? Where does the judgment start and when does it finish? So that you can feel that that's your piece of work and it's not a generalized, generated piece of work. Cultivating your taste is the message that I want to leave you with. All of this is coming to the same spot after we go through the intentionality of it. It's prompting is important, using less energy is important, but I truly believe that the new core skill is not prompting. It's really knowing what looks good, what feels good, because it's your own work. And I think that can only be done by showing up and reiterating over and over again on these layers of intentionality that I shared with you. I'm going to stop here. I think I went a little bit longer than 20 minutes, so thank you for the flexibility. If you have questions or if you want to move straight to the groups, let me know how you want to manage from here.
Well, absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. Everybody give her a silent round of applause. That was really interesting and I think great introduction to our next step in our workshop together. So I think in the interest of time, if anybody has any questions for Madalena, please put it in the chat And we'll definitely make sure we get to it at the end of the webinar, just so that we can make sure that we give plenty of time and space for our conversational stewards to now come in and continue the conversation and a more intimate and individual um, feeling and community in a gathering. So please put those questions in there. Please don't forget them. I definitely want her to get to them. And if we don't get to them, we can always answer at a later time. We can send them out by email. No worries. So with that, I'm going to bring us to our next part of our workshop together is we're going to bring onto the virtual stage our conversational stewards. And I don't know if I can find them here and I can pin them. So they're going to start being pinned. So we have some amazing people who have basically given their time to us today to help guide the conversation around intentional AI and basically help us as a community to start thinking through some of these questions that we're all thinking about. And I think I got almost everybody. I think I might be missing some person. Um, so we have Isabel, Jessica, Scott, Stephanie, Polina, and Maria. And our next portion is I'm basically going to be putting us into breakout rooms. And how this is going to work is take a moment, say hi. We got, 25-ish minutes, so we got plenty of time. So take some time, introduce yourselves, maybe how you're currently feeling. If you feel inspired, what Madalena just talked about, share a little. Maybe share what AI tool you're using with the rest of the group. And then your steward, the person who's going to be leading the conversation and helping guide the conversation, has a couple prompts, and they're going to introduce that. It's just guidance. If the conversation completely goes in another direction, that's completely okay too. So just let it go. It's a safe place for you to share. And so that brings me to number 3 is these are safe rooms. I'm looking at how many people we have. I think in the end, it might just be 1-to-1 or even 1 or 2 to 3 people per room. So it should be pretty intimate and a good conversation. You have about 15 minutes, like I said, so you have plenty of time. And I will try to bring you back around 1850, if not 1855. We'll see how it goes. You can always write me a message if you want a few minutes. So the next part is my job to do some organization. So I have right now all our conversational stewards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm missing one person. I'm missing Paulina. There she is. Okay, so these are your conversational stewards who you will be going into a room with. So our first topic is going to be drawing the line. And I'm taking a look to see who I have in the room. Do I have? Mhm. So give me a few seconds. Okay, maybe this will take me a minute. So maybe if anybody has any questions for Madalena, you can start asking them at the moment as I do all this like tech stuff.
I have a question.
Mhm.
You mentioned like sort of at the towards the end, direction, execution, was that validation? Like where you said,
Mhm.
you control this, let AI do this, and you control this part, like the proofing of it. What
Yeah.
were those? I'd love to see that slide again. I don't know if you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
like
of course. I
screenshot
think
that
the
slide or something.
yeah, yeah.
Just like
I
that.
think it was judgment, the last part, right?
Judgment. Yeah.
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 Yeah, yeah. I will share the presentation as well, so it will come in
Okay.
the follow-up. But the last part was judgment. So basically what you do, so the what and the why, that's a you thing. The execution, so how it gets done, that can be AI if you choose to do that. And then the last part, the judgment, is that good enough? Is that going the right direction? Am I okay with it? That's a you thing again. I thought the sandwich method could be easy to remember.
Yeah, I like that. Yep.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah, is there anybody, any other questions? I'm logistics Megan at the moment. Okay, the tools we use.
Maybe we can take a moment to do it the other way around. Does anybody have already a practice in place that they feel it makes them more intentional in their AI usage and they would like to share? And no is a perfectly valid answer. No, but I would like to is perfectly valid.
So I have something to share, not from my own, but from a friend. She's an AI consultant, and she recently shared a LinkedIn post that she has like, wait a minute, I have it open right here. Her personal AI commitments, and there are a few principles, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
similar to what you said. Like, I always start with a blank piece of paper, and then I verify things, and all these things. And I haven't done that for myself, but I saved it because I loved
Mm-hmm.
it so much to really get intentional and kind of make your own like 10 commandments or seven in her case. And I really
Mm-hmm.
just love the idea. So, and I can
Oh, that's
post the
really
link in
nice.
the chat so you can find it and read it and give her a round of applause if you want to.
Absolutely. I love women lifting other women.
Thank you so much for that.
Beautiful.
I do something similar than what you shared. So I work with
Mhm.
digital inclusion, and every time I have like findings, because I do like training, etc., about biases. So every time I have new findings, new research, etc., I take them into my prompts before. I keep a list, and then I just
Ah, nice.
keep prompting, keep updating the prompt, and also I test my code on them. So I always go back and then test my code on it, which is sometimes very funny.
I love
I can
it.
imagine. Yeah. Ah, that's
So
very
I'm
nice. I
ready
like that.
now. I'm going to pause this right now because I think this is great. I'm going to put us in our rooms and then we'll come back in about 10 to 12 minutes. So hold those thoughts. I love it. But let's go into our rooms and then we can continue sharing after. We have plenty of time. Thank you. See you soon. Isabella, would you like to kick us off? What did you have a chat about in your conversational?
Yeah, we talked about the tools we use, what are we currently using in our tech stack, and also our concerns, what makes us uneasy. So of course, we went through the whole Elon Musk, let's not use Grok, but the supposedly most ethical player among the big ones, Anthropic, they're also they have a problematic background and used by Palantir in attacks. So TLDR, all of us are struggling with our ethics, and at the same time, we're expected to use that in our jobs. Or even like I'm a content engineer. I love automation. I do this thing, but I'm also a human being aware of what's happening in the world. And Karen also had very similar thoughts. And that was basically it. We were just relating to each other and agreeing that there is basically no escaping. But whenever we can still make a choice, evaluate options, we should still do that.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Why don't you pass the ball to somebody else in our group?
Yeah. Paulina, would you like to go ahead?
Sure, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I think it was a very interesting conversations. We had Camila and Mara, and we talked about basically AI transparency and how we would personally appreciate if we could somehow filter AI and human created content. But of course, it creates a big challenge of like how do you, it's not black and white, right? Like you can use AI in different parts of the processes when you create this content. So it's very difficult right now to imagine how we would mark those things. But one of the ideas would be to maybe have like, yeah, like AI generated content completely, and yeah, like different levels of this was just the content that was supported by AI, and yeah, or instead of putting like labels about AI, if you have like perfectly human created content and a human checked this content, then we would mark it as yeah human creation or something like that. And I think all of us would appreciate it in both social media and just generally on the internet, some kind of filter, because otherwise we're like, yeah, feeling like there's an overwhelm of AI generated content these days. Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Mhm.
So we were in the bias group when we initially started off. Antonia had a great example of can't you might have to jump in and tell the story better, but a study being done by 5 Black women researchers, and when they tried to adjust the prompts for that, the output eventually ended up removing Black researchers. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. And it was because they put this women bit into there. And so it started with this bias section, um, prompts and such. And then it just got into, the AI FOMO, the need to do more. And then we looked into perspectives on that, like, from the small side, which is I work for one individual company versus people that work, tech bros and big and larger companies. So kind of all over the board on that end. And Madalena was also in there and had some great insights. So passing the ball to you in my same court.
Stephanie, would you like to share?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Megan. So we were in the group talking about where do we draw the line? Like, what is something that we don't want to do with AI? And we had a lovely discussion about the question, like, can I still do this on my own? Also related to this idea that we need to keep our thinking sharp, that we need to keep our creativity. Um, and interestingly, I was in a group with Natalia and Everett, and we were all like solo business owners, and we are also like doing marketing and content for clients. And then the discussion was also about, okay, helping others realize that they need to keep their own creativity and helping them, draw this line. And then the second topic that we had was really thinking about use cases. That we're not using AI for. And one of them was, for example, I'm a web designer. Websites often need images and illustrations. And I said, okay, my line is I don't create those with AI. I just use a stock database. For the reason that, first of all, there's a lot of IP theft going in the training, like especially for illustrations. And then the second thing is like if you're not a good photographer or photo editor, you will need so much more time to create decent output so that the environmental cost rises and rises. So that's just one example where we as a group draw the line. And then the third point is like if you do that, then obviously disclose it, which probably goes well into the transparency group. So I don't know who was the conversation steward, but maybe that person can go next.
For transparency? That was
Yeah.
Paulina. Was she
Yeah,
already
I
shared?
went to,
Right.
I shared already. Yeah, if Mara wants to share anything else on top
Yeah,
of that.
Mara, did you have any other thoughts on transparency?
Yes, we also talked about how much easier it is to create those personal guidelines and frameworks for ourselves if we're a freelancer or if we're a one person army. But when you lead a team and people have different preferences, their boundaries are different, also their risk aversion or their magnetism towards new tools. How do you manage a team in which everybody feels empowered, obviously, to go to become the innovative marketer, but doesn't cross the team's boundaries, right? Because the tools are changing so fast, and it's really, I don't think the goal is to stop somebody from exploring what Claude can do for you. But I also believe that it's really important to have that kind of team level of understanding, which honestly becomes more and more difficult to do. Because what is the incentive, right? Like, of course, we all know that speed is not the holy grail of marketing communication and content production, but AI kind of teaches you to think in that way, right? It is very tempting. So yeah, on a team level, there's a lot of tensions that appear. So that's also what we discovered.
Thank you. And I think Jessica, you want to share from your group?
Yeah. So we talked about how AI replaces parts of our job. I had the human cost as my prompt, and I was in the room with Aradita and Shami. And yeah, it's pretty interesting because Charmy is an architect. So, and she's now taking on marketing tasks, which she's actually excited about. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And and one thing that Aradita mentioned, which I thought was pretty interesting, she worked in the Mid East for like 10 years, and she views this development just like, yeah, just like a normal development. Like, I don't know how you guys did it, but I remember also, you know, building up marketing teams with little to no budgets, and having to cut costs, having to cut tools, having to do everything DIY, and not getting the support from the team, or from the boss. I worked in IT too, and she did too. And you know, the most important thing is engineering and development, not marketing. Um, so yeah, she compared that to, okay, well, you know, if you're going to do all this and hire cheap labor, you know, cut all these costs, how will that affect the quality of the work? So she's seeing that parallel in that development. And Charmy also said, like, even in the architecture world, they're also, you know, using AI for designs, and it's incredibly speedy, right? And yeah, it's a big threat for designers. We didn't have enough time to finish our conversation. I felt like we could have talked a long time. So
Yeah.
you don't have a solution. But but I thought that
Okay.
parallel, I never thought about that. But yeah, like everywhere I worked, there were small companies in corporate, and they were always cutting corners. And this does feel like it. And that's where the human brain comes in. That's where this judgment part comes in, right? We have to be very critical about what comes out and what we produce. Yeah.
Well, very true. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing, everyone. We have a couple minutes left. So I know we're like pretty much on time, but this is our time to open up the floor. If you have any more questions for our keynote speaker, if anything that our conversational steward said, thank you so much to all of you. I hope everybody can see them pen. They're absolutely wonderful for guiding our conversations today. So thank you all. But yeah, let's open up the floor. Any questions from the audience? Any like aha moments that you're feeling?
I think I have a question, but first of all, thank you everyone for sharing your insights. But what I want to know is that does anyone know of like more ethical AI tools that exist, like Green GPT or like something alternative tools that exist that you already use in your day to day and that you can recommend?
Does anybody want to take that?
I can share a long list if you'd like. I have a resource on this. I'm happy to share it here. Ah, perfect, Mara.
Can you
Yeah.
share that with all of us? Like,
Yeah, would
Yeah,
be
yeah.
great.
yeah.
Yeah, I have it. I'll just share the link in the presentation maybe, or we'll see in what format. Yeah, and that's great, the list of small language models. And then I also have tools that can measure the environmental, particularly footprint, but also just a variety of other tools outside of LLMs that you could use.
Very nice. We have someone who has their hand raised. Go ahead, Ardian.
I would be curious to know, at least through all of your worlds, the businesses that you're working with, or even you know, individuals and consultants and so on, how they are making AI disclosures, either on a formal level or like we did discuss, you know, the idea of labels on content and things like that, but rather, I mean, on any scale, actually, if you know of any emerging practices that have developed a bit, you know, with a little bit of nuance that have progressed a bit, I'd be curious to know how that's appearing in your networks, in your universes.
I can see the opposite. I can see people labeling or claiming on a label that they haven't used AI quite a lot. That's what I'm seeing. And I've started seeing it on consumer products last week, which I didn't think. I saw it at a bookshop. That stuff that they were marketing was not used with AI or created with AI.
Yeah, I also see it on LinkedIn that people start with like, I didn't use AI when creating this post or something like that, which I guess is just the answer to being overwhelmed and yeah, being too much, yeah, seeing too much AI generated content. But yeah, I guess it's also a thing to be creative right now and start using it in our own way because there are no practices right now, and I'm starting to think of like how we can implement it for ourselves, maybe to also introduce some tags or just, yeah, coming up with some ideas and just starting this practice because who, if not us, right? Mm.
Well, thank you, everyone. I know I'm in an overtime, but I really appreciate everybody's time and space. I want to bring us in for a landing, but please don't stop the conversation. Please connect with everybody that you see here. If you can find them on LinkedIn, I can't share that information, but go in if you want to drop your LinkedIn URL into the chat right now. Go ahead so that we can connect with each other. But just some last minute thoughts. Um, Marketing for good with AI isn't a checkbox. We know that it's not something that we're going to solve. We learned today that, we have to keep thinking about it. We're learning together. It's not a straight line, and there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment. But thinking about it consciously and with intention, which is what Madalena was leading us in the direction, is the kind of the general direction that we need to be looking at to start using marketing and creative as a force for good, which is the whole reason why we as an organization exist, is to champion this idea. So I hope that you can take something away from this program tonight and that you learned something, you connected with some friends, you started some more conversations. Kind of some housekeeping is after this, you will get the recording. It'll come to your inbox. It'll also be hosted in our Substack community, so please share it with your friends. And based on your conversations, we'll be doing a little summary cheat sheet, which is kind of a tool that you can share with your community, and please share it with other marketers who kind of have the same, intention as you do. So with that, I hope everybody has a good rest of your day, good rest of your evening. And thank you so much for coming. It really means a lot to us as an organization and having all you wonderful people here.